Leaving him should have brought you peace, but instead you miss him and you feel this deep void from not having him around. Not because he was good for you, not because the relationship was healthy, but because the relief you're seeking is attached to the person who also causes you pain. That's a trauma bond, and here we break that. Welcome to the other side, where you become the woman who can no longer be chosen by the wrong man. My name is Kerrie Hudson. I'm a therapist and a guide, helping women to break toxic relationship patterns and discover the blueprint for healthy, lasting love. And today we are going to talk about how to break trauma bonds even when you miss them. And I think it's important to first understand what trauma bonds are and what they are not, because I think there is a huge misconception about what trauma bonds are. Trauma bonds are connections that you have with a person who both gives you relief and pain, right? So there is this trauma that's formed because you go to this person and you know they're going to hurt you, but you also know that somewhere and somehow they're going to bring you some relief. So they are sort of it's a ball of confusion that is created because this person, you want them because you want that relief, but you also don't want them because they bring you that pain. It's a lot of internal conflict and turmoil that takes place. And ultimately, that sort of dynamic creates huge addiction. If you can imagine, it is sort of like being on drugs. Drugs cause significant amount of damage, right? Not only physically, but to relationships. You're stealing, not you, but someone is stealing and doing all sorts of hurtful or harmful behaviors. And when they get this drug, it brings immediate relief, right? And they're sort of chasing this high of this drug, even though the chase is destructive, right? People are destroying their lives. They're losing jobs. They're lying to people. They're untrustworthy. They're not showing up. They're unreliable, all sorts of things. And this is really the picture of a trauma bond in relationships. A drug addiction is a trauma bond. This addiction both causes relief and pain. And a relationship addiction is the same, right? And, it's interesting because it's really, I think, quite impossible to be addicted to a healthy relationship. It's sort of like being addicted to salads, right? Like, I love salads and I eat them every day, but I cannot eat a salad and nothing's being triggered in me. And that's because drug addiction spikes the dopamine tremendously, right? And so this high is like euphoric. It feels like nothing else. And the same thing happens in these unhealthy relationship dynamics where, this excessive love bombing or attention or whatever it is, or even just a little of the breadcrumbing, right? You get a little bit and then it's taken away. Then you get a little bit more and it's taken away. Both of these sort of like causes this dramatic shift in your dopamine levels that wouldn't happen if you were in a healthy relationship. If you were in a healthy relationship, there is like this consistent flow. And yes, you get little boosts of dopamine, but it's like like a little jolt. But when you're in an unhealthy relationship, they are huge spikes. And that is what's really making this hard to break. Okay. And so, now that we sort of have this picture of what a trauma bond is, let's talk about what a trauma bond is not. Because a lot of times I hear people, and I think I've even had this thought before at one point in time, that a trauma bond is like this connection that's formed with someone over a shared trauma, right? So the perfect example, or maybe an ideal example for me, is war veterans, right? Who have endured some traumatic situations, seen people die or get blown up or all sorts of things, right? And they have survived and they have PTSD. That's not a trauma bond. right? Not necessarily, at least. That is just two people bonding over a shared experience. And it's not necessarily unhealthy. In fact, it can be very healthy, right? It can be calming to have someone who can identify with your experience, who you can exchange stories with, and there's not a lot of questions or inquiry about, like, well, that doesn't make sense, and all sorts of things that often happens for people who have come out of traumatic relationships, abusive relationships, especially on the downside of that relationship. Because if you've come out of an abusive relationship, you know that the abuse, the attempt to control and to keep some sort of hand in your life doesn't end just because you walk away. And the experiences that you have, even in that post relationship phase, where you are trying to really create this distance and get away from this person, can be completely illogical. Where if you're talking to family and friends and they have not shared that experience with you, it actually can become more traumatizing and more triggering to sit in that by yourself, because then you are continuing to have this experience of, well, am I the one that's crazy? Am I actually doing something wrong? Because these are the questions that you're being asked by people who don't understand why someone would track your phone or follow you or accuse you of doing something that you didn't do to a child or something, right? There's all sorts of things that happen in the post relationship dynamics that you actually would benefit from what some might perceive to be a trauma bond, which isn't a trauma bond at all. You would benefit from being around people who you can talk about your experience with. That's why a lot of therapists, including myself, recommend groups. That is why I've developed a group, right? So that you can have this space where you can connect with other women who have survived what you have survived. And when you share the story, it's like, oh, man, that's crazy. My ex did something similar, or I totally get it. I totally believe you. There's not this need to prove what's happened to you. And so in that regard, that is not a trauma bond. That can be a trauma bond if for whatever reason there is this development of a relationship where there's this relief and pain that's happening all at the same time. But in and of itself, that is not a trauma bond. Okay. Would it behoove you to take some time to get to know this person that you're sharing this experience with? Yes. Would it behoove you to have boundaries as you are talking about what's happening for you because you don't really know this other person? Yes. Because, yes, if you begin to trust someone and really give your heart to someone because you've shared an experience without really knowing who they are, that could be traumatic. But it isn't quite a trauma bond, right? Trauma bonds, again, have this element of addiction. It has this element of pain and relief, which, happens in relationships, in healthy relationships, but not to the degree that a trauma bond does. And so I want to make sure that I sort of separate this out and make it clear, because in relationships, even in healthy ones, we will both hurt one another and bring joy and pleasure and all the wonderful things to one another. But the hurt isn't intentional. The hurt isn't malicious. The hurt isn't consistent, right? In a healthy relationship, there's consistency. I can consistently rely on you to show up for me and to have my back, and I feel supported. Might you hurt my feelings from time to time? Yes. And that's normal. And that's something, as you heal, you learn to manage, right? Because a lot of times, even those hurt feelings aren't because the other person even really did something subjectively hurtful. It could be also because there's triggers. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole and get too far off topic, because what we're talking about is how to break trauma bonds. And the truth is, there's no easy way unless you have all the means to really break contact. So a lot of people come out of relationships where there's a trauma bond and you have children that you share. And in most cases, that other person, if they are indeed abusive, is going to use those children as a way of continuing and furthering their abuse and their control of you, right? They're going to use the children to talk about you and to paint pictures and to tell stories. They will tell other people's stories and create a narrative around why this breakup happened and it's all your fault. Okay. And so it's important for you to understand that ending a trauma bond is not easy. And there is still quite the emotional roller coaster to be on if you have to continue your interaction with this person. And so I want to sort of validate just how hard this is. Okay. It's hard. And it requires you to actually become a different person. It requires you to really begin to break away from some of the people pleasing, some of the emotionality, because this person is used to, they know you, right? They've been in your life. They know what your triggers are. They know what your buttons are. And in many ways, it would be helpful for you to deactivate a lot of those buttons. And the way to do that, honestly, is to really be honest with yourself about how hard it is, about how you feel, right? Leaning into the resources of being connected with other people who share in your pain and in your trauma, like group work or a therapist, right? Or both, honestly. And so, because when you deny what you feel, you can't take care of yourself. You can't think clearly about what's actually happening. If you go into a kitchen and you touch a pan and you burn yourself and you feel that burn, well, you're not going to touch that pan the same way. If you are in the kitchen and you're chopping and you cut your finger, you're going to begin to slow down and chop a bit differently, right? And so it's important for you to recognize what you're feeling and to sit in it, not always by yourself, but beginning to do that helps you to say, like, I don't want to feel this anymore, right? And so some of the more practical ways, because that is a huge emotional task to take on in terms of healing, but some of the more practical ways are things that I'm sure you've already heard about. No contact if you can, right? Like I said, if you have the means and the resources and the ability to just go away, that is your best course of action, right? Because whatever they do, you can't see it, you can't hear it, it doesn't reach you. And sort of like if a tree falls in the forest, can you hear a sound? I don't even know. I don't hear it. I'm not there, right? And so some of the more practical ways also include low contact, right? Gray rock method. Those are all really helpful. And it's not just to do the things, right? To sort of adopt them and do them, but it is really to begin to embody them. Because one of the things that's true is how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you are very sensitive and emotionally affected by everything that people say, they're still going to be able to affect you. You're not going to be able to sort of cut off how this person talks about you, and then over here, I'm affected by everything you say, right? So it's important to develop some consistency in how you begin to think. And this is why I said becoming a different person, right? Because even though there are some practical and logical steps, you becoming a person who's not as sensitive and not as reactive, right, will go a long way. Because if they can't poke you and get a reaction, they will stop playing. The game no longer becomes fun, right? And, I know all too well being poked and just being able to let things go, not responding, especially if you have kids, learning how to manage how you check those apps. If you're on those messaging apps, getting on a messaging app is going to be your best friend, right? Because, these text messages, blocking all that out and being able to just communicate on a parenting app, one, creates a boundary and sort of some distance. You get an email that says you got a message, and it's up to you to check it or not. Whereas you see a text message on your phone and it's pretty much right there, right? And so if those messages come through and they trigger you, then you're constantly being upset and disturbed all day. Whereas you can see that you have a message and set it to the side into a better time. Also learning not to respond to everything. Not everything needs a response. And there's so many sort of nuanced things, but the big picture to understand is abuse is ultimately about control, right? This sort of pain that you have been subjected to has been about them being able to control or subdue you in some way, shape, or form. And if you walk away, what it is that you're wanting to gain or regain is control of your life. And finding those nuanced ways to limit, stop, cut off their ability to control. Okay. And really doing the work of taking care of yourself. Because if you continue to get sucked back in, I think I've shared this in a previous video, I think the one around narcissists leaving, going back is far more dangerous than the first time you leave, right? Because if you go back, then all of the things that you've experienced actually gets worse, typically. Okay. So understanding that I need to sort of step out of this relationship and begin the work of becoming different, right? And do all the things, like do all the crying, talk about it to friends, come out of isolation. Your friends and family may not completely understand, but they do love you and they do want to see you happy and healthy and whole. A lot of times friends sort of and family will step away because they don't really want to see you going through that. And sometimes you yourself push friends and family away because that's part of the process of being in an unhealthy or an abusive relationship. And so really coming back out of hiding, right? Emerging in the world, discovering who you are again. One of the significant things that I think a lot of women forget is how important it is to spend time with friends. Friends sort of restore us and help us to remember who we are. These are the people who we can just be ourselves with if you have good friends, right? So reconnecting with friends, going out, having a good time, getting out of the house, right? Getting away from this place where you feel lonely. And there's these messages that start to come up that'll tell you you'll be lonely forever, right? So breaking a trauma bond definitely requires you to just, again, become different. You need boundaries. That's the no contact, low contact, gray rock method, the parenting app use, right? Being able to just really create space and distance, not opening doors just because this person comes. Because there's part of you that does believe, oh, well, maybe they're interested, or maybe they're changed, or maybe, and again, as I said this in the previous video of a narcissist leaving, they're not coming back for love. They're not coming back because they're changed. They're coming back because they're counting on you falling into the same patterns that you've always been in. Okay? So breaking the trauma bond requires you to be very aware of what it is you experience and to be very clear with yourself that I don't want to experience that ever again. Okay? So yeah, these are really the practical steps around stepping out of it. There's so many, again, more nuanced steps, so many small things that you can do, but these are sort of more of the higher level ways of thinking and really trying to conceptualize yourself differently, finding out who it is you actually want to be and pursuing that, right? Even if it means taking on a new job, it's significant where women will cut their hair or change their look, or just it's a part of becoming new. Sure, those are all surface and superficial, but it says a lot, right? It's an assertion of my independence and my newness. So I want to encourage you to not only do that on the outside, but to take some steps to do that on the inside so that you can actually begin to embody and become someone new. But it requires significantly more work than just those little changes. This is just the change you need to create that space and that separation so that then you can actually get into the real healing work. And if you are interested in the deeper healing, I want to invite you to look into my group, the Restoration Group. It is a 7-week online, it's virtual, but it's a live virtual group. We meet 90 minutes each week for those 7 weeks. You get hands-on, right? This is a psycho education group, so it's not therapy, it's not group therapy, but you will get most, if not all, the tools you need to really put you on track to becoming that new person. And if you are just beginning to notice these patterns for yourself and you're not ready to take that huge step, but you want to learn more, you want to start to see more things about yourself and gain more clarity and understand what's happening for you, I invite you to take the relationship pattern diagnostic. Both will be linked below in the description box, where you can begin to see really what are the areas where you're struggling, maybe some of the areas where you are a bit more strong, some that you need severe or significant help in overcoming. And, once you begin to see that for yourself, you'll connect with me. You'll join my email list, the next chapter, where you'll receive some consistent support in helping to overcome and to change and break some of those patterns. And eventually, if you become ready for group work or something deeper or even therapy, you can also reach out to me for that. And so I want to thank you for joining me today. Thank you for taking the time to really do the work of becoming a new woman, because it's important, right? Not just for you, but really for the community of women, for us to become healthier, for us to become whole. I want to see you whole. And I hope that, you'll continue to join me on this journey. Please subscribe. If you are not already subscribed, hit that little button so you can see when the next videos drops. But I will see you next time. Break Free Sundays. Take care.